Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Hi, I'm Chris Murphy, Managing Editor of the Cap Times, and I'd like to welcome you to Cap Times Idea Fest 2020. This is the festival's 4th year, but the first time we're presenting it virtually. Our theme this year is 2020 Changes Everything, which is hard to dispute. With the COVID-19 pandemic, its effect on the health, education, and economic well-being of our community, as well as the calls for change from the Black Lives Matter movement, there's a lot to talk about. We think this year's lineup is our best yet. Idea Fest has grown into a signature event on the Madison calendar. It's also an important showcase for the Cap Times, our locally owned and century-old news publication. If you're not already, we hope you'll consider becoming a Cap Times member. As a member, you'll have access to special Idea Fest programs, plus benefits throughout the year. You'll also be supporting an independent and trustworthy local media source at a critical time. Find details online at membership.captimes.com. I'd like to thank the Burrish Group at UBS, which is the presenting sponsor of Idea Fest this year, as well as our numerous other sponsors. So please, enjoy this session of Cap Times Idea Fest. You'll find the other videos too at captimesideafest.com.
Hello, welcome to Cap Times Idea Fest. I am Lindsay Christians. I'm an arts writer, theater critic, and also food editor for the Cap Times. And this is what Cap Times Idea Fest looks like this year. I am here today with Ayad Akhtar. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to kick us off, just read your bio really quick, and then we can get started.
Great.
Ayad Akhtar is a novelist and playwright whose work has been published and performed in over 24 languages. He is the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Drama and an award in literature from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Raised just outside Milwaukee, Akhtar is the author of American Dervish, which was named a Kirkus Review's Best Book of 2012, as well as the recently released novel, Homeland Elegies. So I'm going to jump right in, and in the introduction to your novel, Homeland Elegies, you say you wrote it after President Trump's election in something of a fever dream, and you've compared writing it to lighting a lifetime stockpile of kindling. So what are you burning in this book, and what is left?
Wow, great question. You know, I've been at this 30-some years. I had a high school teacher who changed my life in high school. Well, high school teacher in high school, yes, of course. She made me want to become a writer. I mean, she didn't actually tell me I should be a writer, but she made me fall in love with stories and storytelling and literature. And, you know, since then I've been accumulating ideas, really. I mean, there's one idea in this book, in Homeland Elegies, which I've been trying to put into story form for probably, I don't know, 27 years or something. And the accumulated sort of narratives of the life of my community in this country, as well as the accumulated stories of what has happened to Wisconsin and the accumulated stories of what has happened to this country. All of that stuff just became a kind of potpourri, and it just really a stew is what it became. You know, it's all of that stuff for years and years just kind of simmering without me realizing it, discarded stuff, and then eventually coming into being in this book. And I worry now about what I'm going to write about. I mean, not really. I'll be fine, I'm sure. But, you know, it's a lot of times you carry these ideas around for so long, whether it's the idea of Riaz, the financier, which is an idea that I've been playing with for a very long time. or the narrative of Asha, which is another sort of idea that's found its way into other stuff and then gotten pulled out. And all of these things could be novels unto themselves in a way, or plays or something like that. But somehow they all just came together in this tapestry, or this quilt that is a portrait of our country in its time of transition between democracy and perhaps whatever is to follow.
Could you see yourself pulling some of these narratives that are in the novel out to sort of develop them in a different way or develop them further?
Probably not. I think that's what I meant by having burned it all
up.
Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I suppose if somebody came to me and said, there's actually some interest in Homeland Elegies as a episodic television show, or as a limited series. And I kind of did write it with the idea, not that it could be adapted to TV, but that it was a kind of reality serial with episodic chapters.
Yeah.
And so each chapter is its own episode in the life of the narrator, which is also an investigation of a particular corner of the American experience.
Yeah, it very much read, not like a series of essays exactly, but like each thing. I read a lot of short stories, and it felt like each chapter could sort of stand individually in that same way.
Totally.
Homeland Elegies has been out for a couple weeks now, I think, officially. And you've been doing a ton of these kinds of interviews.
Yeah.
I wonder what kinds of things are coming up that maybe are surprising to you, or that you didn't see necessarily when you wrote it, that you're like, oh, yeah, I guess that is in there. Any surprises?
A bunch. I mean, I think the big surprise to me is not something that should be a surprise, which is the preoccupation folks have with whether something's real or not, And I guess I knew that was going to happen, but it's always surprising when something is going to happen actually happens, or it's often surprising. So that's been interesting. And I think, one of the things that's been encouraging to me is how, for example, last night I did the Heartland Forum of booksellers. So about 80 booksellers from across the Heartland, and Sarah Bagby from Watermark Books in Kansas, in Wichita, Kansas, hosted. And she had such a profound, deep reading of the book and really related it to the dilemmas of Kansas. And the ability for folks to relate the book to the experience of this country that they're having, whether they are, downtrodden immigrants, if you will, for lack of a better way of putting it, or established middle-class small business owners who are dealing with the fallout and the consequences of large-scale shifts in scale in the American economy. Amazon, dealing with Amazon as a bookseller, or dealing with, Walmart if you're a hardware store owner. So all of those sorts of things are part of what the book is about, and it's encouraging that folks are finding that for themselves.
Yeah. You mentioned this preoccupation that folks have with what's true, what's not, who's you, who's not you. It is an unsettling choice deliberately to have a narrator with the same name who also won a Pulitzer, who's from the same place-ish, It's tough. And I was listening to one interview, and you sort of said, like, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter which of these things are true. And I want to push you on that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean it doesn't matter?
I did an event with the wonderful writer Maria Semple a few days ago, and she came up with, I think, the best analogy so far, even than I had, which was that it seemed like I had sat down to write, and I forgot my life. And then I just decided to write some stuff, and then to basically use my life where it was helpful and not use it where it was not helpful, because I was trying to tell a story. And that I had no fidelity to the facts and no interest in the facts. And that's exactly right. I'm trying to tell a story. I call it a novel because I am asking the reader to hold it to a different standard of truth. I'm asking them to hold it to a standard of truth that rises above the merely actual, or the merely anecdotal, or the merely particular to me, and that says something, I hope, more expansive about what's happened to our country. Something profound is happening to America. The Chinese have a proverb that says, in a house where the son kills the father, the causes do not lie between the morning and the evening of a single day. What is happening in Washington now does not lie between the morning and the evening of even a single election cycle. There's a long genesis to the sort of social changes that have created the mayhem and the disrepair that our country has fallen into. And I wanted to tell that story. I knew that 9/11 was part of that story. And I also knew that nobody would be able to dissociate the fact that I'm a Muslim writer from me telling it. So I had to account for all of that. But the argument of the book is that it wasn't until I started to see what it was happening to all of us, not just to the downtrodden Muslims, that I could understand a little bit better what had happened to the whole country.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to be running this on the same day that there's a talk back with John DeGata and Jim Fingal after the lifespan of a fact. And that whole play is about the tension between truth and facts, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of what you're getting at. But I feel like also you're referencing this idea of the decay of truth, or the decay of this shared factual experience, so that we can all agree that XYZ are the facts about whatever, climate change, about political issues, about whatever the things we see before our eyes that then we're lied to about, right?
Yeah, right. That's right.
But you made a deliberate decision to say, you know what, this is a novel. You're not supposed to take anything of its, at face value as fact.
And yet I seduce the reader into constantly thinking that it's real by using facts from my life that are verifiable and consistently pivoting into the tone of memoir. Mm-hmm. And that, again, is by design, as you articulate, I think, very eloquently. I'm trying to mirror the collapse of fact and fiction in a form. I think that at its best, art is not a corrective of reality. It reflects reality at a deep level. And I think formally, I wanted to find a form that was going to mirror and ensnare the reader in the very same confusion around fact and fiction that we're dealing with politically, that has become, the air we now breathe. Decay of truth. I love that. Truth decay. That's exactly right. It's, or let's call it a memoir of alternative fact.
Oh, God. I don't know how to feel about that. I wonder, you're touching on some similar themes that you do in your theater work, right, in this novel.
Right.
When you did sit down to write it, when you have sort of these ideas and these themes you want to touch on, or these stories you want to tell, what dictates the form? Like, why was this not a play or a series of plays? Why did this need to be a novel?
There's a certain rigor to telling a story in dialogue. Like it's a real discipline. And I think that when I choose to do that, I have to obey the form in a way that I can't master that. I have to obey the fact that dialogue drives the story, and that when people speak, they have to speak from a place of what's real for them in a moment, driven by what they want. And so the dramatic necessities drive what's possible to say and do in a play. And that's a limitation, but it's also a great, it's a liberation of a different sort. With this book, I wanted to address directly what was happening to the country, not in some metaphorical way. I wanted to speak to it with immediacy, urgency, and hopefully all the eloquence that I could muster. And in order to do that, I had to address the reader directly, which I can never do in the theater unless I wrote a monologue, which in a way this kind of is. It's kind of a very long monologue in which the narrator, with my name and many of the facts of my life, tells a story of his family and his own coming of age politically and his success artistically, and how that's embedded within a larger social changes that are happening in the society.
There was one review that I read of the book that also mentioned that it was a way for you to include and indict yourself in these sort of larger American problems, right? Like, you could have very easily given the narrator a different name and slightly different background, and you wouldn't be getting half of the questions that you're getting now in all these interviews. But you chose to give him your name, and I wonder, like, what you think of that idea that, like, you wanted to include yourself in the critique.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, and I also think that one of the central driving ideas, or one of the central driving sort of motivators in finding this form, was recognizing that the dominant story of our time is me. What am I going through? What do I deserve? Why aren't people hearing my voice? It's about time I got a chance to speak my truth. You know, we have all of these services now that begin with my account, you know, my cart, my auto, my insurance, me, what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do, who I want to be, who Instagram tells you I am. All of that curation of the self, that shaping of all experience, political, personal, ideological, philosophical, filtered through the narrow prism of me, what I want. Quintessentially American, quintessentially an American ideological creation by a mercantile advertising system in order to sell us a lot of crap that has turned into a deeper ontological orientation within our society. So I had to tell that story. Me. What's the story of me? My story, my sufferings, my success. And in the process, I hope, seduce the reader the way that the best Instagram scrolls do, but hopefully with enough clues that not only is it maybe not all true, but it's maybe a little bit more unseemly than we would like to think that it could be. And look, hopefully, you know, I'm fully aware, unfortunately, that the literal readings of the book will, for many readers, foreclose literary and metaphorical readings. But it was a chance I had to take. And if I was going to bring the kind of, you know, in this era of shamelessness, I had to dispense with shame, and I had to countenance the possibility of disgrace on my family. And if I was going to do that, I had to accept disgrace on myself. I couldn't do that to my dad and then not also do it to myself.
Yeah.
So.
It seems to me also this moving deliberately toward discomfort, like, I'm going to make you uncomfortable and we're going to stay here for a minute. Like,
but you'll get to laugh too.
Yeah. That to me has, again, it goes back to that theatrical, like, building of tension and releasing it, which, and just like pushing the reader to stay in that discomfort, or just not only in kind of
that to me is the hallmark of great dramatic writing, is that you are pushed into the uncertainty of warring and competing concerns or desires, and that you don't know who is going to win. The contest is not over until the play is over. And I think that that's what I'm always trying to do, as even as a prose writer, I'm trying to stay inside that the living jugular of that uncertain outcome.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about writing about money. You mentioned this idea of, like, the individualism allows us to be more effectively marketed to. I was thinking about that this afternoon as I was hearing a podcast ad for something designed specifically for my hair. Our hair is also individual, isn't it? Right. And all I could think was, goodness gracious. But you write about money. I am of the first generation, basically, to do worse off than my parents' generation, right? And when I think about the power of the market, it sort of feels like thinking about climate change, where it's so big and so scary and my feelings around it are so negative, I run in the other direction. But you don't. You go toward it. You go toward the complexities of the market, of, again, that discomfort. Can you talk about why you want to write about money and about debt and these uncomfortable things?
Well, it's the story of our time. the redistribution of wealth away from the heartland to the coasts, the redistribution of wealth from rural communities to urban communities, the redistribution of wealth from the population to the individual, from the collective to the individual, which has been enshrined by 2 generations of legislation and idealized thinking by both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. This is not, sure, Barry Goldwater started all this, mess, but whatever. Clinton participated just as much as Reagan. And at the end of the day, to me, that's the big story of American life in the last half century, is the despoiling of the nation for the sake of the individual. We see it in Wisconsin. I mean, we've seen it in every industry in Wisconsin. We've seen it in farming. We've seen it in paper. We've seen it in tool and die. We've seen it in manufacturing of all sorts. When did it become acceptable for the individual to sell off our national infrastructure for personal benefit? Why is that acceptable? Why is that something that has ever even been allowed, let alone enshrined by the covers of Barron's and CNBC? And so the market, to me, is really the fundamental pulse of American society, in the sense that decisions are made at the highest levels, only more transparently now than before, but it's been like this now for a while, on the basis of the market and on the basis of the rules of finance. Finance, those who understand debt are those who understand the future. If you understand the future, you understand how to use debt, and you can lift yourself out of the indentured servitude of lower class and middle class American life. If you don't understand debt, well, then you're a chump. And to me, telling this story, I mean, I don't know, it's the story. It's so much bigger even than racial injustice, which is a huge story and an important one. But this is even bigger, and people don't know it.
Yeah.
And in some sense, it's partly, it's partly the ideology and the spin of the system, if you will. The system tells us what to think about all this stuff. Oh, you've got a retirement account? Make sure that you keep buying the dips. Otherwise, you're going to get left behind. So what's the story now? I mean, I don't want to get left behind. I want to make sure that I pay my bills. That's the story.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about the intersection of money and debt and investment and like the Muslim identity and the power that kind of comes along with some of those things. I'm really interested. I feel like a lot of your work does kind of revolve around like the Muslim identity as other growing up in the United States, and the community's sort of conversations within itself. But I don't feel like many people ask you about your Wisconsin upbringing and your Wisconsin connections, and they come up a lot. Like the first time we talked, you mentioned the idea of tension in a Packer game, like you don't know how it's going to work out, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like Wisconsin is a big part of this book. Wisconsin is a big part of your life, your life then and now. You maintain connections with Milwaukee. Where are those things sort of intersecting for you now? Do you identify still as a Wisconsinite? Like, why is it important for you to maintain those connections with the state?
My folks are both passed away. My dad died last year, but he was in Wisconsin until the end of his life. And my mom, she died 2 years before he did, also in Wisconsin. And my brother's still in Wisconsin. I'm on the board at Milwaukee Rep, and I'm involved. I have a lot of very close friends in the arts community in Wisconsin. And I guess as a writer who's come to some national prominence, or at least in the theater, to have that kind of a platform and to recognize that my beginnings, even in the theater, started in Milwaukee, and that I just feel connected. I don't know. It's, to me, locality is I suppose I do think of it as a moral thing. I suppose I do think that it matters, that one is invested in the community, whatever that means to one. And for me, that means in part Wisconsin, means in part, Milwaukee. But I think I've also gotten a lot of I've gotten a lot artistically from the state. And, in particular in this book, the portrait of Wisconsin is a metaphor for the portrait of America. And what's happened in Wisconsin, which forms a healthy portion of the last quarter of the book, which is really a portrait of healthcare in this country. It tracks a malpractice lawsuit that my father goes through at the very end of his career and end of his American journey, if you will, and is a kind of referendum on his experience as an American here after 50 years. But it happens against the backdrop of a healthcare industry that is increasingly overrun by MBAs who are making decisions not on the basis of patient care, but on the basis of spreadsheets, and how those tensions actually create tensions between rural and urban folk and create a kind of animosity, a social resentment, if you will, which I think everybody who lives in Wisconsin is keenly, keenly aware of. That's the big story. And then in many ways is a really important undertow or say deeper current to how we've ended up where we've ended up. And to not take those people seriously is not only insulting, it's wrong. That's what we are. I mean, we have to be able to take care of ourselves, our fellow. So anyway, Wisconsin has served the purpose for me of a kind of petri dish, if you will, about sort of exploring these larger currents in these. And there's been some wonderful, wonderful writing about Wisconsin that's come out. So I'm not alone. I get a chance to sort of like traffic in some of these really amazing studies and these amazing sort of long form treatments of politics in Wisconsin.
Yeah. I think in the book, one of the things that really does come across is that you have real affection for the state. Like I get that in the descriptions of driving through the countryside, but it's complicated too. Like the scenes that you write in the courtroom in La Crosse, I think, right?
Yeah.
Those you write them like dramatic scenes, like you switch into playwright mode for a minute, which I think is fun.
It's true.
And you talk about the tone shifts that happen when the opposing attorney, for example, mentions something about, his Muslim identity, and the father in the book is not practicing. He doesn't need to know what time services start or whatever, but he mentions it because he knows it will change how they see him.
Yeah.
And I have to say, as a Wisconsin reader, there were parts of that chapter and some others too, where I was sort of holding my breath, hoping we came out well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we increasingly are not coming out well.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate truth. And love him or hate him, and there's certainly lots of reasons to feel less than positive about him. Scott Walker has not ultimately been good for the state. He may have benefited certain individuals and certain interests, but he's not been good for the collective state or the collective psyche of the state. There's a sense of widespread division, aggression, anger, partly fueled by the things that I was talking about earlier, but they've now become channeled into these identity issues that, folks getting spit on because they're wearing masks. I mean, at this point, at this particular juncture, look, I don't want to get into it. All I want to say is the Wisconsin that I grew up in, folks were welcoming and folks were good-natured. And I never was felt to feel like an outsider. Nobody ever made me feel like an outsider. I was an outsider. Sure, we were outsiders, but nobody made us feel that way. It's noticeably different in the state now, and it doesn't make me love the state any less. I still feel very, very affectionate and connected to the state and to its well-being. And I feel compassion for those who are really, really upset about the way things are going and seem to have some skewed understanding of what the real genesis of those things is. They seem to have bought some ideological interpretation around all of that, which is not real. But I'm not going to pretend that things haven't changed. They have, as they have in this country. We're a day removed from a national conversation about peaceful transfer of power. Is this a satire?
Yeah.
Is this what are we in? Are we in a joke now? I mean, I don't even understand. I don't recognize the country that we're in. We've never needed to have this conversation since George Washington. And now there's a legitimate conversation because somebody in the Oval Office is talking to Hannity every night. I mean, it's a joke. And I think everybody knows it. But now there's this super added dimension. There's added dimension of sort of ideological distaste for the other side. So I still prefer the devil I know off that awful other thing. And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but really, is that where we have now come as Americans? So this kind of righteous, I hope, indignation is what animates the energy. I think somebody who sent me something about a bookseller who had said, harnessed the electricity in this book could power the grid of a small city. I think there's a lot of energy in the book because I feel so passionately about what's happened.
Back to the burning,
That's right. That's
Truly.
Right. Fire is a metaphor.
It is. We're going to take a quick break here and hear a little bit from our sponsors, but when we come back, we will talk a little bit more about your dramatic work. I have some questions.
Great.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Meritor, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.
Welcome back. So I wanted to start the second half here with a question about, again, going back to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a battleground state in this upcoming election. In the course of the book, the character of your father, he comes around. Spoiler alert, he has a change of heart. He realizes maybe he made a mistake in supporting President Trump.
Because the book begins with an extensive sort of anatomy of my father's, involvement with Trump in the 90s that led to a personal attachment, which made him a rah-rah supporter in the 2015-2016 campaign.
Do you think that there have been similar transformations or changes of heart in others?
Yeah, I think so. But I think that then the question becomes, if we're going to wade into the politics of it, what does the other side represent? And then we get back to that "the devil I know" argument. And at least my 401k is, I'm you know what I mean? Like it gets back into a different logic, even though there's a distaste. Yeah, there's a distaste but then it's instrumental, and it will help the court, or it will help this, or it will help that. And, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I noticed in the recent New Yorker profile of you that you mentioned that you continued to work on Disgraced, your play that you won the Pulitzer for, after you won the Pulitzer.
Yeah.
And your response was, well, I didn't give it a Pulitzer. Like
I didn't.
But
it needed work. I mean, I was trying to make it better, and then all of a sudden they give it a Pulitzer. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Thank you. And this is changing my life, and this is amazing. But I'm not going to stop doing what I had to do because somebody else said it's great. Still be better.
Well, True, but at some point, don't you have to declare something done?
I mean, Tiger Woods won the Masters with a swing that had him win it by, I don't know how many more strokes than anybody else in the history of the tournament when he was 21. Saw a video of himself and said that swing is horrible and rebuilt his swing.
Good Lord.
So, you know, which is not to, I don't want to compare myself for Tiger Woods to for a lot of reasons.
Fair enough.
But I will say that, you know, I do aspire to strive to excellence, whatever that means. And as a writer, you know, when you see your play night after night, you do start to figure out ways that it could be better. You know, Tony Kushner was working on Angels in America until a few years ago. He was still making changes to the text.
Wow.
So, you know, now he's officially declared it done, and I've officially declared Disgrace done. I did write a screenplay with a wonderful Israeli filmmaker by the name of Oren Moverman, and we did make some changes. So when he shoots the movie, I think it's going to be, I will finally have solved a few things that took me years and years of craft to learn how to do. So.
Yeah. Well, you are kind of in the thick of it now with Homeland Elegies, which I assume you finished quite a while ago. As you're sort of revisiting it in the nitty gritty with all of these interviews that you're doing, are you feeling that urge to like tweak it? Like things that you wish you would have done differently?
Good question. Not yet.
Okay.
I think this is the first time that I've had the craft to do what I wanted, to do what I thought I could do. And that in a way, the book surprised me and seemed almost to exist before I wrote it. And I kind of found it rather than me having to make it, if that makes sense.
Elizabeth Gilbert compares this process to killing the butterfly. Like the idea of something beautiful and creative is there, but in order to have something on the page, you have to kill it, and it's still the butterfly, and it's beautiful, but it's dead. So it's never going to look exactly like it did when it was flying around, and it's sort of that making peace between the thing that you imagined it could be and the thing that it is in life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But the analogy in this case is that there never was a butterfly. No, I mean it. Yeah. I didn't know what I was writing as I was writing it. It unfolded. It came right out of me. And then at the end, I was like, oh my God. Or even midway through, I started to see what this was. It was leading me the whole time. And the language that poured out of me was language I didn't know. I didn't know I had that language until it was on the page. So I never had an idea. I was constantly chasing the living. It was almost like an eel that I was trying to hold. And I don't know what to ascribe that to. I remember talking to my editor, after I'd finished the book and telling her that I woke up one morning after the book was done and the brain or the mind that had created that book was gone. I didn't know, I couldn't recognize the state of being or the cognitive state that I was in at that time when I was writing the book, and I couldn't write sentences like that anymore. So it was finished. So I think that's maybe another reason why I wouldn't revisit it, because I wouldn't even know how to. I wouldn't know how to shape those sentences differently. They exist separate from me in some very strange way that I can't account for.
Is your playwriting like that at all? Or has it been like that? Okay.
Never. I mean, I will feel that I've been inhabited by real voices, but once those voices are down on the page, they get transferred over to actors. And then those actors, I can watch them and I can make changes and I can shift and I can count syllables and I can add the right pause and I can, the New Yorker article talks about Daniel Kahneman and sort of a lot of theories of cognition. I think that there's a lot of science actually in the making of theater, because at its best, you are unifying the physiology of the audience. You're unifying the breath cycles and you're unifying the heartbeat cycles of an audience in mass performance. So there is actually, a lot of artists wouldn't want to approach it that way, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But there is science in it.
Yeah. The first time that I encountered your work, as I think I've mentioned before, was with Invisible Hand. It was the first piece of yours that I read, and it was part of a big stack of plays I had to get through. And I just sat and I read it all in one go, which you're supposed to do with plays, but sometimes I don't because life is life. And the thing about Invisible Hand, which if folks don't know it, it's about a hostage who teaches his captor how to work the market in order to pay off his own ransom.
Right.
And it's basically a one-room play. It's all in one room. When I saw it a few years later at Milwaukee Rep, it was all just one space. But it feels like there's this rope that you're pulling the whole time of that play. And like sometimes you let it get a little bit less, you give a little slack, right? But then it just pulls again. And it's like I was swept up by that play. And I wonder if you can talk about how you build, how you think about dramatic tension in your plays, and how you do that.
Thank you for that tribute. I'm so delighted to know that was your experience of reading the play.
I love that play, yeah.
And I think that to me, what's key about dramatic writing is that characters have to want things. If characters don't want something, you get a lot of murky behavior on stage. And I think that, without criticizing any of my colleagues, because some of them are really extraordinary writers, but nevertheless, audiences are still sometimes less than taken by even their best work. And I put Chekhov in that category. Mm. It's not always clear in a kind of post-Chekhovian and post-Beckettian theatrical paradigm what characters want. In a way, it seems as if the hiding of a character's desire and then the sort of revealing of it in a late portion of the play is a kind of dramatic paradigm. But to me, in order to build dramatic conflict, desire has to be clear from the beginning. You have to know what a character wants. The desire can change, but a visible, tangible articulation of desire, to me, is central to telling a good story. And I think that we see that in forms as crazy as Vanderpump Rules to House of Cards to King Lear. That all of those stories, the desire of characters scene to scene is very clear. It gives the audience something to cathect to and a way for them to understand. And again, the analogy with sports is very good. It's very clear what a sports team wants. They want to win, right? It's very clear once, Aaron Rodgers and the crew have the ball that they want to try to score a touchdown. That visible, tangible goal is incredibly clearly articulated. So all of the nuances of what happened on the offensive line, the play calling, the sideline dramas, the penalties, the drive down the field, the interruptions, something happening in the stands, all of that is corralled and shaped by the very clear desire to get into the end zone. When that desire is less clear, for example, when the outcome of the match has been decided, it's 35-0, it's not clear that they really need a touchdown anymore. Mm. So what happens on the field is there's less dramatic tension in it.
Right. I think one of the reasons I tend to prefer theater to sports is because the desire of your characters can change. Not only, or they can even want the same thing. Like at the Invisible Hand, the captor wants to go free.
He wants to stay alive, yeah.
He wants to stay alive. He wants to see his family again, right? But as a viewer or a reader, my allegiances can shift to who I find more sympathetic at what point.
Totally.
But also, he kind of gets swept up in the excitement of playing the market too, right? And I think there was a spate of time in the American theater where there were a lot of dinner party plays.
Yeah.
Right? And
one of them was called Disgraced.
yes, correct. That's why I referenced it. And I kept going back to, your Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, where, I remember specifically my professor saying, why do they stay? Why do Nick and Honey stay? Why do they stay all night? Why don't they leave? Why don't they just go home? Well, they can't be together. Their relationship has become so toxic that they can't be together. It was one of the things
Sure.
that we worked through.
Yeah.
But this idea of like desire being the thing that is
Yeah.
pushing them, but also you're very good at creating real stakes that don't necessarily have clean or even not even just that they're not happy or sad, but that they have way more nuanced endings than that. The Who and the What was like that for me, in that like it ended in a place where I felt all kinds of complicated with this family, trying to find their way back to each other with this faith that is so important to them, but it also
Right.
it looks different and it feels different than it used to, and they're existing in this world that we all live in. Do you have a process where, as you're building a play like that, a family play, where do you have a process that allows you to get into those relationships?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I in particular with that play, I started a technique for the first time that I hadn't used until then, which was to populate my studio, my writer's studio, with empty chairs.
Oh wow! Okay.
And the empty chairs would all have a label on them, and each chair was a character. And what I would start doing is I would sit in the chair, and I would. It was a way to sort of localize, if you will, the process of what a character might be feeling or thinking, or how they might respond to a particular situation. And I would go sit, and I'd just allow myself to be in Zarina's place, and allow myself to be in Ufsal's place, and the extent to which I think the larger question about how I create tension, right, invariably becomes a question of what my proclivities or my sort of like what my tendencies are, what I find meaningful in work. And so I don't want to universalize to other people. I do have observations that I make about feeling that certain work speaks to me more than other work does. And as I said about Chekhov, I find Chekhov to be an extraordinary writer, but a little bit less valuable for me dramatically than Shakespeare, where desire is always very clear. But that's how I build dramatic tension. And it's how I do it also even in the most nuanced moments, that the extent to which desire is clear, again, to use the football analogy, there's so many different things that happen in a football game. And the touchdown is certainly the goal, but it isn't the only thing that ever happens. In fact, it's often the thing that happens the least. In some games, there's never a touchdown made. But all of the other stuff is the story of the game. And so, in a way, a visible, tangible goal or a clear articulation of a character's desire, that's the MacGuffin, what Hitchcock would call the MacGuffin. That without which, everyone thinks it's about that, but in fact, it's about everything else. And that focus allows you to have that open feeling of everything else. So,
yeah. Speaking of classical theater,
yeah.
Your play Junk, about junk bonds in the stock market in the 1980s and all of these sort of Machiavellian power players. It feels very like Richard III, but a big play, lots of characters, not the kind of thing that we really see a lot, again, in American theater very often,
Right.
for reasons of money and space and time.
Yeah.
The theater critic joke, right, is that like, you want 90 minutes, no intermission. That's like music to my ears, right?
yeah, exactly.
But Junk it's an ambitious play on several levels, right? You're talking about this topic that is complicated, the stock market. You're talking about, all of these different characters. Why was it important for you to write that play in the way that you did, with all of that, with the scope, with the number of characters that you did? Why did you need to do it that way?
A few things. I just come off, Disgrace had just won the Pulitzer. And I thought to myself, nothing good can come of this. because either I believe that I deserved it, and I start being a little less connected to the parts of myself as a writer that need to grow, or I believe that I didn't deserve it, and I start using my writing opportunities as a way to prove that, in fact, I did, to myself and others. So it seemed like a kind of psychological trap. And the only solution to getting out of that psychological trap, it seemed to me, was to use it as an encouragement to take a big, bold artistic risk. And so I thought, let me write a play that I'll probably never be able to get produced at any other point in my career. Right now, I got a window that if I write a play this big, really a Shakespearean drama, inspired by the histories, about debt financing and the shift in ideology around money in this country, something I've been thinking a lot about for many years. If I write that now, it'll get produced. And the other thing about it, you know, as an author, I think a lot of times one of the things that you're working through is influences, right? And I was working through the influence of Mamet and working through the influence of Shakespeare. And so in a way, I got a chance to, I had a sandbox in which to really work through that as much as I could. I can't imagine having written this book without having taken that risk and without having done a little bit of battle with Shakespeare and David Mamet. It built something in me. It built a kind of artistic chutzpah, a confidence. It gave me a bit of muscle, and it allowed me the freedom to hazard a big risk like I did with this book, where it's so freewheeling and the hijinks are so constant and the sense of structure is so inconsistent, you know? So
yeah, that's really interesting. I'm now sort of scanning back over the play and thinking about, like, where do I see influence of Mamet? Who the word, you know, the adjective is always gritty and like realism.
Well, Glengarry. It's
yeah,
Glengarry.
And the, you know, the power plays among these powerful men, right?
And the use of language. It's also the use. It's the way I'm using line. That there's this weird kind of attempt to internalize classical iambic pentameter, but also this kind of percussive use of the American consonant in Mamet, that I'm trying to find my own way to use that language in Junk.
Yeah, yeah. There is a reckoning, as you know, going on in American theater right now. We See You, White American Theater. Milwaukee Rep has been wrestling with these ideas and questions for several years now, trying to make the space more equitable, trying to expand that to other regional companies and other folks. What does equitable theater look like to you?
It's a complicated ecology. In Milwaukee, the lion's share of the audiences coming to the theater are white, and they're older. And what Milwaukee Rep has been able to do is to populate its stages with 60% artists of color, which is an interesting proposition, and I think a valid endeavor. And they've done some really wonderful work. And the invariable balance that a producing artistic company has to find, both because of its donor base and also because of its audience, is the balance between education and entertainment, and the balance between exposing an audience to something new and giving them what they already know. And I think that in a position of power, being responsible for a $13 million budget and all of that, I think Milwaukee Rep has done a very, very good job of all of that. Is there still ground to cover? For sure. No question. I think that the moment that we're in now, the existential moment for the theater, because I don't know that a lot of the American regional theater is going to survive. I think we're looking at a landscape where we're going to see widespread mass closures of arts institutions, and we're going to see a collapse of arts production in this country. And so it seems to me that there are two separate issues at stake. One is finding a way for us to become better at making sure that folks who have generally tended to be kept out are not kept out. And on the other hand, remaining fiscally viable where communities are not, let's not pretend that the theater is a big thing in the United States. It's not. It's not like Britain. It's not like Germany. In Germany, there's a $50 billion package of support for the arts sector. In the UK, doing 3% of that, 1.5 billion pounds. And everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. The pandemic is now the excuse to get rid of the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And that's the conversation in this country. So I think that solvency is a critical issue at this particular juncture for the regional theater. And hopefully we can find a way on the other side of this extraordinary, unprecedented forest fire that is going to destroy so much of the infrastructure of the arts community in this country. Hopefully on the other side of that, in rebuilding, there can be greater attention paid to inclusion.
Some of these regional companies that can't produce work in person have been trying to produce work online. There are even some folks, as I'm sure you know, who are writing for an online theater format.
Yes.
Which is
Richard
different than
Malcolm.
film, right? Yes, the Apple Place. But I wonder, do you have any thoughts about that? There are arguments that this could grow up alongside live theater, like in-person live theater, that it could be basically two forms. And there's also a lot of talk about how it removes barriers. If it's free and you can watch it from your house, well, gosh, that's a way of experiencing theater that a lot of people never had access to before. Well, nobody, I guess. But do you have any thoughts about online theater?
The question is probably above my pay grade. So let me answer it from my humble station, which is as a playwright who is fully enamored by the physicality of the theater. To me, there is no meaningful definition of theater that does not include the living human body. I don't accept it as theater, which is not to say that I don't respect my colleagues and what they're doing. I think it's great. I don't find myself engaged in remotely the same way. I don't, I think Richard's plays are amazing, but I'm not interested. Not really. Not in the way that I am when I'm in the theater and I'm with those actors. That's why I love the theater. That's why I think it matters. We've got to do whatever we can to try to pay the bills and to try to keep people engaged with our organizations. And if that means creating online content, that's great. I don't think there's a company in the country that feels that it's remotely effective at being a substitute for live theater. I don't think anybody feels that, but maybe Disney does with Hamilton.
I mean, there's only one of those.
And there's a 3, 4, 5 year, whatever it was, experience in the theater, physical experience that ends up being a record of. So
yeah. I have some fun questions to sort of wrap us up today.
Okay. Yeah.
One is, when you come back to Wisconsin, like, what are the things that you do? Like, what do you miss when you're not here? And when you come back, what do you go for? Food-wise, arts-wise, anything. Sports-wise.
Yeah, I mean, waterfront brewery, right? Fishing in Vilas County. I mean, my dad had season tickets to Green Bay games. We don't have them anymore. And I'm just happy to watch the game on TV. It's fine. Though I do find it a little depressing to watch Green Bay games in Wisconsin, because when they lose, the entire state goes into a state.
Oh, no.
Whereas when I'm in New York and Green Bay loses, I feel bad, but not everybody around me feels bad.
Nobody else feels bad.
I remember one time after Green Bay lost, it was an important game. I was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I was walking in Elm Grove and with my brother after the game, and this gentleman was, sweeping up his leaves and looked over at us as we were passing, and we looked at him, and he just shook his head and lowered his head. And we did the same. And we all knew what we were thinking, which was, how could they lose that game?
There is no joy in Mudville.
So, yeah, I mean, there's, I spend, as I said, I spend a lot of time at Milwaukee Rep. I think that I love being there. I love Mark and the team there. And so I always visit and spend a lot of time there. What else? I mean, there's some really great food in Milwaukee now. I mean, I love Dan Dan. I feel like Dan Dan's my favorite Chinese restaurant in maybe America. I love Dan Dan. I love being in the Third Ward. I think if I lived in Milwaukee, I would probably live either in Bayside or the Third Ward. A lot of great places in Bayside. I love the lake. I love the lake down by St. Francis. There's a beautiful coastline down there. The northern, it's a nice, but there's so many houses, you can't really get access to the lake there, So, just the stuff, Boswell Books. I go to Boswell Books every time I'm there. Daniel Golden, who owns Boswell, I always check in with him. So, yeah.
You have mentioned several times in your descriptions of Homeland Elegies, reality TV. And so I just got to ask, what are your shows? I'm a baking show person personally, but what are your reality shows? What do you like?
Probably Vanderpump is the big, that's the paradigm. I think there are middle seasons of Vanderpump, which are really, they're extraordinary. They're just from scene to scene, the ability, visible, tangible goal, the clarity of people's desire and how it's articulated and the sensationalism and the puerility of it. It's just hard to beat. All
right. And this is a question that I really love asking, especially artists.
Yeah.
But what do you do to take care of yourself? When you're not making work, what do you do to take care of yourself?
Well, yard work.
All right.
We have a nice place upstate, sort of a modest but nice. It's a nice tract of land there. A lot of wood that needs to be cleared, and a lot of leaves that need to be pulled out of the pond, and a lot of stuff like that. And I love doing that. So that really, for the last during the pandemic, that's been my salve is yard work.
Do you have a big garden?
No, but we've got 15 acres of just a lot of there's 2.5 acres of lawn, and then there's all this woods, and there's trails through the woods, so that's got to be cleared, and constantly burning dead brush and dirt, fallen wood and all that sort of stuff. It's just ongoing as nature is. Nature just keeps going. It's very inspiring actually. You take out a bunch of bushes, there's these bushes that grow upstate in New York which are really thorny. And you just got to get rid of them because otherwise they just overrun everything. You pull them out the next day, you pull them almost, but they're rhizomes, so they're pushing up. The next day, they're already pushing up. It's the inexhaustible vitality of nature is very inspiring, even when it's just weeds. So
inspiring is a word for it, for sure. Yeah. Well, I like that we started with, burning kindling in the book, and we end with burning leaves.
And burning wood, yeah.
And burning wood, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for making time for this. Thank you for your
work.
work.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you.
Cap Times Idea Fest 2020 is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. Presenting sponsor, the Burrish Group at UBS, a financial services firm with global access and a local focus to pursue what matters most for its clients. Major sponsors are HealthX Ventures, backing entrepreneurs who are creating value with digital health solutions. Exact Sciences, pursuing earlier detections and life-changing answers in the fight against cancer. Quartz, health plans built with you in mind. And Madison Gas and Electric, your community energy company whose goal is net zero carbon electricity by 2050. Co-sponsors are Epic Systems and the Godfrey Kahn Law Firm. Other sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Home Savings Bank, Unity Point Health Moderator, Cargo Coffee, and the Forward Theater Company. Media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal and Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Please consider becoming a Cap Times member. Learn more at membership.captimes.com.